existence.
Right, well, and especially the experience of the Holocaust makes Jews
Correct.
very, very defensive and even, you could say, paranoid about that. And I'm not saying, please understand, I'm not saying that those questions are the right questions to ask, or that, that that's a good thing, that a Jew might think those things. I'm also not saying that that's everybody. It's really not. We were so happy to have people come in and use our building for the Ramadan prayers, partly because of what it meant for just, living peacefully with our neighbors, and but also partly just, in a way to show that, hey, we're not afraid to have a bunch of people, Muslim people come in and use our building. We know that they're not going to hurt us, But I'm not going to say that those kinds of fears are absent from Jewish people's minds.
Rabbi, last year
Yeah.
or the year before, when you were here with your congregation for one of the Ramadan dinners, you said something that really affected us. That was when the Palestine-Israel was there was a huge fight, actually, the day that your congregation came, lots of deaths on both sides. And you told us, we're not going to talk about politics over this dinner, that's not what this dinner is about. But you said, I think that if the people on both sides would have had a meal like we are having this evening, this would not have been able to happen.
Right.
And 2 years later, I remember how much that affected me. And I think that that's the point, There are prejudices on both sides. There are Muslims that have ideas about Jews, and there are Jews that have ideas about Muslims. But if we sit down and we break bread and we have a meeting like we're having tonight, then that's going to change our opinions. Absolutely. Can I ask my question?
Sure. Well, actually, let me come right back to you. I just want to follow up just with a little comment about this, because it's not directly related, but it is related. Just to, in case you don't know this, just to let you know, since we're touching on conflict in the Middle East, people in my congregation represent a whole spectrum of perspectives on Israeli policy and on the best way forward in the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, and the deal with Iran, and all these questions. And so we don't necessarily need to delve into politics in this conversation, unless you have other questions you want to ask, because I'm open about that. But I wouldn't want you to think that all the Jewish communities in Northern Virginia or our congregation all, let's say, support the Netanyahu government in Israel, or all of its decisions. Okay.
Which of those three groups is most common in Israel?
Which of those three groups is most common in Israel? Which three groups?
The one you mentioned, like Reformist, Orthodox, and
Israel is a whole different story. In Israel, I promise I'll come to your question.
Mine's easier.
But he's got really good ones over here too. In Israel, there is no reform. There is a reform and a conservative movement in Israel, but it's been there for many years already, but it's still in its infancy, because it's such an uphill battle to get people to think about any way to be religious in Israel besides Orthodoxy. And it is an interesting thing for you guys to hear, I think, to talk a little bit about that. In Israel, they think of Israeli Jews in two categories. You're religious or you're not religious. And that's what they call it, religious or secular. But it's not actually true. That's not really what the categories are. There is Orthodox, and then there's people who may have some religious practices that they do. They may light the candles. They may actually do more observance for the Sabbath than Reform Jews do in the United States. They may light the candles to begin the Sabbath. They may even keep kosher to some or some great extent. They observe holidays like Passover and Yom Kippur, our day of repentance. But they consider themselves secular only because they are not Orthodox, and they hate the Orthodox. So the Orthodox have a lot of animosity directed at them because of the strange idiosyncrasies of Israeli government. The Israeli government is structured in such a way, it's a democracy. It's almost too much of a democracy. And you could be a very small political party and only get a few votes in the election, but still get a seat or a few seats in the parliament. And if you're a big party, you can only govern if you put together a coalition of enough groups so that you have a majority of the seats in Parliament, in Knesset. So that means that these very small parties, many of which are religious, ultra-Orthodox parties, have way too much power because the two big groups, the conservative and the liberal group, always need to find small parties to join in their coalition. So lately it's been the right-wing party ends up putting together a coalition and promising a whole bunch of things to the Orthodox parties that the rest of Israel doesn't want. And it messes things up a lot. So secular Jews have a lot of anger towards the Orthodox in Israel, and that's part of why they consider themselves not religious at all if they don't consider themselves Orthodox. It makes it really hard for Reform rabbis to help them choose to have religion in their lives that's not Orthodox, because they just react against religion. And they haven't even entertained the idea yet that there's another way to be Jewish and to be religiously Jewish besides the Orthodox way.
You know, I think the Muslim majority world sees a lot of itself in what's happening with Israel, and I think vice versa. I think, you know, politics and religion, you know, this is something
Toxic mix.
very
right?
toxic mix.
Yeah.
Muslim world is also
Okay.
This corner was forgotten.
Oh no.
Really simple question. So you said the 3-time prayers, and just like we have our 5 times prayers, and we pray them in Arabic, whether we understand Arabic or not, and whether it's our native language or not. Are those 3 times prayers always done in Hebrew? I know that the bar and bat mitzvah age, the kids are able to read Hebrew to be able to have those events.
Right.
So do they actually understand what they're reading, or are they like our kids and they just can make the sounds right? And then do you have something like we have dua, which is the, you know, God, please help me pass my test today, no matter what language you're speaking in. Do you guys have something like that where you open your hands and in English you pray?
Okay, so the first part, our services are both in Hebrew and English. So we will chant or sing or say prayers in Hebrew, and then we'll intersperse that sometimes with English readings. Primarily because most of the people sitting there don't understand the Hebrew, and we got to throw them a bone. So that you can also, you know, in addition to doing these meditative prayers and engaging by speaking the holy language, you're also thinking about the themes and getting help doing that by something you understand. So the services for bar bat mitzvah have both Hebrew and English in them, and the kids will do both Hebrew and English. They basically learn the sounds. They could recognize a few of the words, and we have taught them what the meaning of each prayer is, and hopefully they remember what most of those meanings are, you know. And I'm trying to, so the thing you're saying, that it was, what would you say it was dua?
You said dua. So you open your hands and ask God whatever language, Turkish, English, supplication. You know, God,
Right.
my child is ill, help them.
So do you mean a moment in your service when you can just pray for whatever
Or
you
in
want
general,
to pray
throughout
for?
your day, not just in the synagogue, but in general, as you're driving in traffic, God help that person in front of you, that they learn how to drive better. You know?
Yeah, well, we might do that, you know, just kind of because it's a cultural thing to think sometimes about God in that way. I don't know if Reform Jews won't necessarily say a blessing or something in that moment, but they might think about God. And in the service, we have a silent prayer where the idea is just to reflect on your own prayers, not necessarily the ones that have been laid out in the service. And so that could be prayer of supplication, asking for, praying for something. And some of our prayers themselves ask for things. Whether or not the Jewish person or the Reformed Jew believes that God is the kind of God that will grant an individual prayer from a person is a different question. But I think that's also a very complex theological question. You know, even if you are not somebody who would say or who conceives of God in that way, sometimes there are moments when you still have that way of relating to God. So I think that you know, belief is a very complicated thing. Yes?
Thank you. This is actually not a theological question, but a political one, and more about American politics. The most progressive groups here in the U.S. are the Jewish minorities. in different areas, yes.
And
I'm
some of the
so-
most conservative.
And also the most conservatives, yes. But all religions lead to conservatism. Generally, more religious communities, the more conservative it is politically. Is there something in the Torah or in the religious teaching that leads to a little bit of more progressive view in terms of social justice, women's rights, tolerance to different individuals? Is there a grain in the religious teaching that is different and provides for outlet to progressivism, or is there no link whatsoever?
Well, I think that what you said about religion leading people in a conservative direction is sometimes true, but maybe often true, but I think we can find examples when that's not the case. For example, the civil rights movement in the United States was led by a priest, Martin Luther King, and had a lot of religious content in it. So there are some liberation movements that have come from that. If you look at the Pope today, he's certainly taking religious tradition in a very different direction. So I like to think that religion isn't always a force for keeping those who are in power and things like that. And the reform movement of Judaism was very involved, actually, in the civil rights movement as well. We're kind of proud of the fact that the part of some of the drafting of the Civil Rights Act took place in a Reformed Jewish office called the Religious Action Center, which is now the political advocacy wing of the Reform movement. And there were Reform and Conservative and I'm sure Orthodox rabbis who were involved in that movement. So that's just a little bit of just kind of poking just a little bit at the sides of your question. But I would say yes, that Judaism does have. I think all religion has teachings that lead towards efforts of justice. What I was talking about before, I think maybe some of the people might have been in another gathering when I was speaking at the very beginning, so some of you might have missed, but teachings about being kind to the stranger because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. Looking out for the rights of the poor and the workers. So I do think that those traditions are very important in Judaism. Taking care of the community, their teachings such as there will always be needy among you, and you always have to care for them. And just the strength of community. When we talk about big government and little government in an American national politics discussion, clearly Judaism is a big government kind of religion. Just looking back at the story of Judaism wasn't just a religion; it was a civilization, and it was a big government civilization. It was everything. So it's coming from that perspective that the community is responsible for making sure that the needs of the community are met. But I think that all religions really should be leading us towards the same kinds of concerns of justice. Unfortunately, religion also really tends to favor tradition, and tradition sometimes tends to keep people stuck in the same place, and those things can be co-opted and used by those who are in power. I'm not a political scientist, so that was just really very armchair thing. How are we doing that? Yeah.
Question, please.
Oh,
Let's take the last question. This would be the last question because Rabbi seems tired.
no,
He's standing up.
I'm okay. I'm just worried about these guys. They have to go to work in
Okay,
the morning.
all right.
Um,
Yes, sister, you want?
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It's a question about children this time. As a Muslim mom, Muslim parent, it is a struggle to raise my children as Muslims when they are a minority in the U.S. I'm required to raise my kids as Muslim. It's a big struggle. I really wonder, as a Jewish parent with children, are they required to raise them as Jewish? What do they do to make Judaism appealing to them? How does it work for you guys?
I think that really an Orthodox rabbi might have a closer point of reference to your point of reference in this question, I have to admit, because they might be, raising children who would wear a kippah. I'm wearing one now, but I don't wear it all the time. And I have sons, but they won't, I'm sure they won't be wearing a head covering to school. We put it on when we have religious services. And that's a big difference, what you go to school wearing and things that are outwardly different about how you live your life. So I think it's not as hard, not because we're Jewish as opposed to Muslim, but because I'm in a Reformed Jewish community, and we're already more assimilated than I think the Muslim community is. But we do struggle with that a lot, because we're just at a different point, I guess, well, I won't say a different point of the journey, because I don't know what the journey of the Muslim American community is going to be exactly, but we're at a different point on our journey than when Jews just arrived to this country. And so we're much more assimilated, but we're still trying to teach our kids Hebrew and bring them to religious school, 1 or 2 or 3 times a week, get them to study through bar mitzvah, and then even further through to confirmation, which happens at age 16, and then raise Jewish children. And we want the culture and the religion to remain strong and remain alive. And we're competing against soccer and
music and
football games on Friday nights, and going to the movies, and all these things, and demands of school, which are very, very hard. And we're also competing with the fact that in today's world, people don't necessarily see that much value in religion. So we're not a community that teaches that you have to believe the literal word of the Bible, but we're a community that teaches prayer and that a search for God is important, and that gathering together in a religious community has value and teaches values. That's sometimes a struggle to make that a priority in people's lives. And as a rabbi, it's a big struggle. As an average Jew, I think if it's important to them, it's a struggle for them. Some of them don't care that much.
Should I just say?
Okay.
I'm going to comment. So I have many friends from college who are Jewish, and one of the things they say that stands out in maybe not creating their religious Jewish identity, but their personal Jewish identity is summer camp. And most of them are Reform, and so and it's only children, so it's children in the counselors.
Conservative and Orthodox too. A lot. Jewish camp is a huge thing, and if you go to camp, it's much, much more likely that you're going to have a strong Jewish identity when you get older, and you're going to want to be part of a synagogue community and carry those things forward. And I think it's because you've immersed yourself in a group that's living Jewishly, and you've made friends, and it's a positive experience. It's just hard to give people that experience in our busy lives.
And the trip back to Israel, I think, some of my college
Trips to
friends,
Israel are huge.
they went to Israel and they said that made a really big impact for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for this very fun conversation.